The Sunday morning sun beat down on Tahlequah, Oklahoma, with the kind of heat that made men question their life choices. And Zara Kincaid stood over a cast-iron stove, wondering if perhaps she had made the worst choice of all, by attempting to cook breakfast for the ranch hands who worked her late father's property. She watched in horror as smoke curled up from the biscuits she had just pulled from the oven. Their bottoms charred black as coal while their tops remained pale and somehow still doughy in the center. The year was 1882, and women were supposed to know how to cook. Yet here she was at 22 years old, having inherited a cattle ranch and not a single domestic skill to her name. Her father, Marcus Kincaid, had raised her like the son he never had after her mother died, bringing her into this world. He taught her to ride, to rope, to brand cattle, to negotiate prices with buyers who tried to take advantage of a man they thought was getting old and soft. What he never taught her was how to make a decent meal, because they had employed a cook named Rosa, who handled all of that until she passed away peacefully in her sleep, just 3 months before Marcus himself succumbed to a heart attack while mending fence on the north pasture. Now Zara stood alone in the ranch house kitchen, staring at these pathetic excuses for biscuits, knowing that the 6 men who worked her ranch would be coming in from their morning chores expecting to be fed. She had managed to keep them on after her father's death by promising fair wages and square meals, but lately the meals had been anything but square. They were lopsided disasters that the men choked down out of loyalty to her father's memory and perhaps out of pity for her situation. She heard boots on the porch and quickly scraped the biscuits onto a platter, arranging them so the burned bottoms did not show quite so obviously. The door opened, and in walked Dawson Tucker, her foreman, a man of 30 years who had worked for her father for the past decade. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that he kept just a bit too long, tucking it behind his ears when it fell into his face. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-gray that reminded her of storm clouds gathering over the prairie, and when he looked at her, she felt something flutter in her chest that she immediately dismissed as indigestion from sampling her own terrible cooking. "Morning, Miss Kincaid," Dawson said, removing his hat and hanging it on the peg by the door. The other men filed in behind him, all of them nodding respectfully to her as they took their seats at the long wooden table her father had built when she was just a girl. "Good morning," Zara replied, her voice steady despite her inner mortification. She brought the platter of biscuits to the table along with a pot of gravy she had managed not to burn, though it was thin and watery rather than thick and creamy like Rosa used to make. The men took the biscuits dutifully, slathering them with gravy in what she suspected was an attempt to make them edible. She watched as Dawson bit into his biscuit, saw his jaw working extra hard to chew through the combination of burned crust and doughy interior. He swallowed with visible effort, then reached for his coffee and took a long drink. When he set the cup down, he caught her watching him and gave her a small smile that somehow made her feel both better and worse. "Thank you for breakfast, Miss Kincaid," he said, and the other men murmured their agreement through mouthfuls of terrible biscuits. Zara sat down at the head of the table where her father used to sit and picked at her own food, barely able to stomach what she had created. After the men finished eating, they headed back out to their work, and she began the process of cleaning up, dumping the remaining biscuits into the slop bucket for the hogs, who she suspected would turn their snouts up at them too. The rest of the day passed in a blur of ranch work. She rode out to check on the cattle in the south pasture, finding them healthy and content despite the summer heat. She met with the man who supplied their feed, negotiating a better price by pointing out that she could just as easily take her business to his competitor in the next town. She repaired a section of fence that had come loose, her hands remembering the motions her father had taught her, even as her heart ached with missing him. As evening approached, she returned to the ranch house to face her next culinary challenge: supper. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the supplies Rosa had left behind, and felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She could run a ranch, manage accounts, handle difficult men and difficult cattle, but she could not make a simple biscuit that was not simultaneously burned and raw. That night, she served fried steaks that were tough as leather and potatoes that were somehow both mushy and undercooked. The men ate without complaint, but she saw the way they exchanged glances when they thought she was not looking. After supper, Dawson lingered while the other men headed to the bunkhouse. "Miss Kincaid," he began, turning his hat in his hands in that way men do when they have something difficult to say. "The men and we appreciate everything you are doing. Running this ranch alone, it is not easy work. Your father would be proud." "But," Zara prompted, crossing her arms over her chest. "But nothing," Dawson said. "I just wanted you to know that we are here to help if you need anything, anything at all." She softened slightly at his tone, which held genuine kindness rather than pity. "Thank you, Dawson. I appreciate that." He nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and headed out into the twilight. Zara watched him go, then turned to face her kitchen once more. Tomorrow was Monday, and Mondays meant wash day and bookkeeping and a dozen other tasks that needed her attention. But first, tomorrow meant breakfast, and breakfast meant more terrible biscuits unless she figured out what she was doing wrong. She spent the next hour studying Rosa's old recipe book, which was stained and worn from years of use. The instructions seemed simple enough, but clearly she was missing something crucial. She mixed up a batch of dough, practicing the technique over and over until her arms ached, but when she baked them, they still came out wrong, still emerged from the oven as inedible lumps that mocked her efforts. By the time she fell into bed that night, she was exhausted and discouraged. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of burned biscuits and disappointed faces. The week progressed in much the same fashion. Each morning she produced biscuits that ranged from terrible to catastrophic. The men continued to eat them without complaint, washing them down with strong coffee and whatever else she managed to put on the table. She tried varying the temperature of the oven, the amount of buttermilk in the dough, the type of flour she used, but nothing seemed to help. Her biscuits remained stubbornly awful. By Thursday evening, she was ready to admit defeat. She sat at the kitchen table after the supper dishes were washed, her head in her hands, wondering if perhaps she should just hire a cook and be done with it. But money was tight after paying the inheritance taxes on the ranch, and she could not afford another salary right now. Besides, it galled her to admit defeat at anything, especially something as basic as cooking. Friday morning dawned with clouds gathering in the east, promising rain that the parched land desperately needed. Zara stood at the stove once more, mixing biscuit dough with grim determination. When she pulled them from the oven, she was unsurprised to find them burned on the bottom and raw in the middle, same as always. She served them to the men with a tight smile and ignored the way Dawson looked at her with something that might have been sympathy or concern or both. After breakfast, as the men headed out to get as much work done as possible before the rain came, Dawson paused at the door. "Miss Kincaid, I was wondering if perhaps tomorrow, being Saturday, you might let me help with the cooking. I spent some time as a trail cook before I came to work for your father, and I thought maybe I could lend a hand." Pride flared hot in Zara's chest. "I can manage my own kitchen, thank you." "I did not mean to suggest you could not," Dawson said quickly. "I just thought maybe you had enough on your plate with running the ranch, and I could help ease the burden some." "I said I can manage," Zara repeated, her tone brooking no argument. Dawson nodded and left without another word, and Zara immediately regretted her sharp tone. He had only been trying to help, and here she was snapping at him like a wounded animal. But the truth was his offer had stung her pride. She did not want to need help, did not want to admit that she could not handle everything on her own. Saturday came with the promised rain, a steady downpour that kept most of the ranch work limited to the barn and other covered areas. The men came in for breakfast soaked through despite their oilskin coats, and Zara served them wet, heavy biscuits that somehow absorbed moisture from the air even before they went into the oven. No one said a word, but she saw one of the younger hands, a boy named Charlie who could not be more than 19, actually struggling to swallow his portion. As the men headed back out into the rain, Zara stood at the kitchen window and watched Dawson stride across the muddy yard toward the barn, his shoulders hunched against the weather. Something about the way he moved, purposeful and steady even in the storm, made her think of her father. Marcus had always said that Dawson was the best foreman he had ever employed, that he had good instincts and a steady hand with both cattle and men. She spent the rest of Saturday morning doing bookwork, tallying expenses and income, trying to figure out how to make the ranch profitable enough to keep everyone employed. The numbers were tight but manageable, assuming they could get their cattle to market before the winter and assuming the prices held steady. It was a lot of assuming. By late afternoon, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and Zara found herself thinking about Sunday. Sunday had always been special on the Kincaid ranch. Rosa used to make a big midday meal after church, though the Kincaid family had stopped attending regularly after Marcus's wife died. Rosa would cook a roast or a ham, make fresh bread and vegetables from the garden, bake pies and cakes that made the whole house smell like heaven. The men would rest on Sundays, doing only the essential chores, and everyone would gather for that meal like a family. Since Rosa's death and then her father's, Sundays had become just another day. Zara did not have the skill to make the kind of meal Rosa used to prepare, and it seemed pointless to try to maintain the tradition when she would only disappoint everyone. But as she sat at her father's desk, looking at his ledgers and his careful handwriting, she felt a fierce desire to bring something of the old ranch back, to honor the memory of the people she had lost by maintaining the traditions they had valued. She stood abruptly and went to the kitchen, pulling down Rosa's recipe book once more. She flipped past the biscuit recipes, past the bread and the cakes and the pies, until she found the section on stews. Her eyes landed on a recipe for beef stew that Rosa had marked with a small star in the margin, indicating it was one of her favorites, or perhaps one of the family's favorites. The instructions were detailed and the ingredient list was long, but as Zara read through it, she felt something like hope stirring in her chest. Stew was different from biscuits. Stew was forgiving. You could adjust it as you went, taste it and correct the seasoning, add more liquid if it got too thick, or let it simmer down if it was too thin. Stew did not require the mysterious alchemy that seemed to govern baked goods. Stew was just patience and time and good ingredients. She decided right then that she would make Sunday special again. She would make Rosa's beef stew, and if it turned out well, perhaps it would make up for all the terrible biscuits she had inflicted on her ranch hands over the past few weeks. Sunday morning arrived clear and bright, the rain having washed the dust from the air and left everything smelling fresh and clean. Zara rose before dawn and headed to the kitchen, pulling out the ingredients she would need for the stew. She had good beef from one of their own steers that had been butchered the previous month, potatoes and carrots from the root cellar, onions and herbs from the garden that somehow still thrived despite her neglect. She had flour for making dumplings and fresh cream from their dairy cow. She followed Rosa's instructions carefully, browning the meat in batches in her largest pot, setting it aside while she sautéed the onions until they were golden and fragrant. She added the meat back to the pot along with water and a bit of vinegar, herbs and salt and pepper, then set it on the back of the stove to simmer slowly. The house began to fill with a smell that made her stomach growl and brought tears to her eyes because it smelled like Rosa, like Sunday mornings when her father was still alive. The men came in for breakfast, and she served them the usual terrible biscuits along with fried eggs and bacon. But she noticed Dawson's eyes going to the pot simmering on the stove, his nose lifting slightly as he caught the aroma. "Something smells good, Miss Kincaid," he said, and the other men murmured agreement. "I am making stew for Sunday supper," Zara said, trying to keep the pride out of her voice. "Like Rosa used to make." "That is real kind of you," Dawson said, and when he smiled at her, she felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. After breakfast, the men did their essential chores and then settled in for a day of rest, some of them playing cards in the bunkhouse, others reading or writing letters home. Zara tended her stew, adding the vegetables at the right time, tasting the broth and adjusting the seasoning, feeling a sense of satisfaction she had not experienced in the kitchen before. By late afternoon, as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, she called the men in for Sunday supper. They came willingly, drawn by the smell that had been tormenting them all day. She had set the table properly with Rosa's good dishes, something she had not bothered with before, and she ladled the stew into bowls with care, making sure each portion had plenty of meat and vegetables. The men dug in with enthusiasm, and Zara held her breath waiting for their verdict. She watched as Dawson took his first bite, saw his eyes widen slightly, watched him swallow and then immediately take another bite. Around the table, the other men were having similar reactions, eating with genuine pleasure rather than dutiful determination. "Miss Kincaid," Dawson said after a moment, setting down his spoon to look at her directly. "This is the best stew I have had since my mother's, and I do not say that lightly. This is real good." The other men echoed his sentiment, and Charlie actually asked for a second helping before he had even finished his first bowl. Zara felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of accomplishment that was somehow more satisfying than successfully negotiating a business deal or fixing a broken fence. She had fed her people well, had brought them together around the table the way Rosa used to do. As the men finished their meal, lingering over coffee and conversation in a way they had not done since her father's death, Zara caught Dawson watching her with an expression she could not quite read. When everyone else had finally drifted off to the bunkhouse or to their evening tasks, he remained behind to help her clear the table. "You did not have to stay," Zara said as she filled the sink with hot water. "You should be resting." "I wanted to help," Dawson said simply. "And I wanted to tell you that what you did today, making Sunday special again, it meant a lot to the men, meant a lot to me too." Zara felt her cheeks warm at his words. "It is just stew." "No," Dawson said, shaking his head. "It is more than that. It is home. It is family. It is the kind of thing that makes men want to stay when they could go anywhere. Your father understood that, and Rosa did too. I am glad to see you understand it as well." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw not just her foreman but a man who cared about this ranch and the people on it as much as she did. "Thank you, Dawson. That means more than you know." He held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper, then cleared his throat and grabbed a dish towel. "Well then, let me dry while you wash, and we will get this cleaned up in no time." They worked in companionable silence, and when the dishes were done and put away, Dawson retrieved his hat and headed for the door. He paused on the threshold, turning back to look at her. "Will you make the stew again next Sunday?" "I think I might," Zara said, smiling. Assuming it was not just beginner's luck. "I do not believe in luck," Dawson said. "I believe in skill and care and putting your heart into what you do. You did that today, and it showed." After he left, Zara stood in her kitchen feeling something she had not felt since her father's death. Hope. Not just hope that she could keep the ranch running, but hope that perhaps she could build something here, create a home rather than just a business. And if she was honest with herself, she felt something else too, something that had to do with the way Dawson had looked at her across the kitchen, the way his presence had made the house feel less empty. Monday morning arrived too soon, bringing with it the usual round of ranch work and terrible biscuits. But somehow the biscuits seemed less terrible, or perhaps the men were more willing to tolerate them after having been fed so well the day before. Zara worked through the week with renewed energy, riding out to check on the herds, meeting with a potential buyer for some of their yearling steers, repairing equipment and ordering supplies. Each evening she found herself thinking about Sunday, planning what she would make, wondering if perhaps she might attempt the stew again or try something else from Rosa's book. By Friday, she had decided that she would make the stew again, but this time she would make cornbread to go with it, since cornbread seemed more forgiving than biscuits, and she thought she might have better luck with it. Saturday evening found her in the kitchen practicing her cornbread, and after 2 failed attempts, she finally produced a batch that was golden on top and moist in the center. She felt ridiculously proud of herself, and immediately began planning for the next day's meal. Sunday morning, she rose even earlier than the previous week, wanting to give the stew plenty of time to simmer and develop its flavors. She followed Rosa's recipe again, but this time she felt more confident, trusting her instincts when it came to seasoning and timing. She made a double batch, knowing that the men would want second helpings and perhaps even third. When she called them in for Sunday supper, they came eagerly, their faces lighting up when they saw what she had prepared. The stew was even better than the week before, the meat fall apart tender and the broth rich and flavorful. The cornbread was a revelation, sweet and crumbly and perfect for soaking up the stew's gravy. As the men ate, Zara noticed Dawson kept glancing at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When the meal was finished and the others had left, he once again stayed behind to help with the dishes. "Miss Kincaid," he said as they worked side by side at the sink. "I was wondering if perhaps you might call me by my first name when we are alone like this. All this Miss Kincaid and Mr. Tucker business seems a bit formal considering we have been working together for years now." Zara considered this, knowing that it represented a shift in their relationship, but unsure if she was ready for such a shift. Then again, her father had always called him Dawson, and if she was going to run this ranch properly, she needed to be able to relate to her foreman as a partner rather than just an employee. "All right," she said, "but only if you call me Zara." "Zara," Dawson repeated, and the way he said her name made something warm unfold in her chest. "That is a fine name. Suits you." "My mother chose it," Zara said, then wondered why she had volunteered that information. She rarely spoke of her mother, having no memories of the woman who had died bringing her into the world. "She chose well," Dawson said softly. He finished drying the last dish and set it on the shelf, then turned to face her fully. "Zara, I want you to know that I think you are doing a remarkable job with this ranch. Your father would be proud, and not just of your business sense or your work ethic. He would be proud of this, of you keeping the traditions alive. of you taking care of people." "Thank you, Dawson," Zara said, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. It had been so long since anyone had told her they were proud of her, and hearing it now from this man whose opinion she had come to value so highly affected her more than she would have expected. The next week passed in the same pattern, with terrible biscuits during the week, and then Sunday arriving like a reward for having survived them. This time, Zara decided to try making dumplings in her stew, light fluffy dumplings like Rosa used to make. She was nervous about attempting them, knowing that dumplings could be tricky, but she followed the recipe carefully and was rewarded when they emerged from the pot tender and perfect. The men raved about the meal, and Charlie declared it was even better than his own mother's stew, which earned him some good-natured ribbing from the other hands. Dawson was quieter than usual during the meal, but Zara caught him watching her multiple times with an expression that made her pulse quicken. When the others had left and they were alone in the kitchen, Dawson cleared his throat. "Zara, I need to tell you something." She felt her stomach drop, suddenly certain that he was going to quit, that despite his kind words he had decided to move on to a ranch where the foreman did not have to choke down burned biscuits 6 mornings a week. "All right," she said, bracing herself for disappointment. "I have been thinking," Dawson began, then seemed to struggle with his words. "That is, I wanted you to know that I appreciate these Sunday suppers more than I can say. They remind me of home, of family, of all the things I left behind when I came west to make my fortune." "Did you make your fortune?" Zara asked, more to fill the silence than because she actually wanted to know. Dawson smiled. "No, but I found something better. I found work I can be proud of, land that feels like home, people I care about." He paused, then added quietly, "I found you." Zara froze, the dish in her hand suddenly forgotten. "Dawson, I am not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you have enough on your mind without me adding to it. I just wanted you to know that I value what we have been building here, not just the ranch but these evenings together. It has come to mean a great deal to me." She set down the dish carefully, her hands trembling slightly. "It has come to mean a great deal to me too," she admitted. "I find myself looking forward to Sundays, not just because I get to cook something edible for once, but because of these moments afterward, talking with you, working beside you." Dawson's face lit up with a smile that transformed him from handsome to devastating. "Then perhaps we might spend more time together beyond just Sunday evenings. I could teach you some other recipes if you like, or we could take a ride together when the work allows. I would like to get to know you better, Zara, not just as my employer but as a woman." "I would like that," Zara said, and she realized as she spoke that it was true. Over the past few weeks, something had shifted between them. A connection had formed that went beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. She was not ready to put a name to what she was feeling, but she knew she wanted to explore it further. They stood looking at each other across the kitchen, and for a moment, Zara thought he might kiss her. But instead Dawson took a step back, nodded formally, and said goodnight, leaving her alone in the kitchen with her racing heart and trembling hands. The following week seemed to drag, each day an eternity as she waited for Sunday to arrive again. But she threw herself into the ranch work, riding out with Dawson to move the cattle to fresh grazing, helping to break in a new horse that one of the hands had been working with, traveling to town to meet with the banker about a loan for improvements they wanted to make before winter. On the ride back from town, with Dawson beside her in the wagon, she found herself acutely aware of his presence, of the way his hands held the reins with easy confidence, of the breadth of his shoulders and the line of his jaw. When they hit a rut in the road and she was thrown against him, she felt heat rush through her body at the brief contact. "Sorry," Dawson said, steadying her with one hand while keeping control of the horses with the other. "Are you all right?" "Fine," Zara managed, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. They rode in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who are at ease with each other. Finally, Dawson spoke. "I have been thinking about what you might make for Sunday supper. What if I helped you this time? We could make it together." "You do not have to do that," Zara said automatically, though the idea appealed to her more than she wanted to admit. "I know I do not have to," Dawson said. "I want to. Besides, if I am being honest, I am a bit weary of burned biscuits. Maybe if I teach you some techniques, we could improve your weekday cooking as well." Zara laughed despite herself. "So the truth comes out. You are not helping me out of the kindness of your heart, but out of self-preservation." "Can it not be both?" Dawson asked, grinning at her. "I care about you and I want to help you succeed, and also I would very much like to eat biscuits that do not require quite so much coffee to wash them down." "Fair enough," Zara conceded. "Then yes, let us cook together on Sunday. You can teach me your secrets." "Deal," Dawson said, and they shook on it, his hand warm and calloused against hers. When Sunday arrived, Dawson came to the kitchen early, before the other men were up, and they worked together to prepare the stew. He showed her how to season the meat before browning it, how to deglaze the pan with wine to capture all the flavorful bits stuck to the bottom, how to layer the flavors so that each ingredient contributed something special to the whole. As they worked, they talked, and Zara found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, stories about her father and her childhood, fears about whether she could truly manage the ranch on her own, dreams of what she wanted to build here. Dawson listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was really paying attention, offering insights from his own experience without ever making her feel inadequate. "You know," he said as they waited for the stew to finish cooking, "when I first came to work for your father, I was running from something. I had made some mistakes back home, gotten involved with people I should not have, and I needed a fresh start. Your father gave me that without asking questions, without judging me for my past. He taught me that a man could be more than his mistakes, that what mattered was what you did going forward." "I never knew that," Zara said softly. "He never mentioned it." "He would not have," Dawson said. "That was the kind of man he was. He gave people second chances, and then let them prove themselves on their own merits. I have tried to live up to the faith he showed in me, to be the man he believed I could be." "You have succeeded," Zara said. "My father valued you highly, and so do I." Dawson looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Zara, I know this is probably not the right time, and I know you have so much weighing on you already, but I need to tell you that my feelings for you have grown beyond respect and friendship. I think about you constantly, worry about you when you are riding alone on the range, feel proud when I see you handling difficult situations with grace and strength. I am falling in love with you, and I needed you to know that." The kitchen suddenly felt too warm, too small, too charged with possibility. Zara's heart was pounding so hard she thought surely he must be able to hear it. "Dawson, You do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I am not asking for an answer or a declaration. I just wanted to be honest with you about what I am feeling." But Zara found that she did want to say something, that she needed to speak the truth that had been growing in her heart over these past weeks of Sunday suppers and shared conversations. "I am falling in love with you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it was not appropriate or that I was just lonely or that I was confusing gratitude with something deeper. But the truth is that you have become essential to me, and not just as a foreman or a friend. When I wake up in the morning, You are the first person I want to see. When I accomplish something, you are the first person I want to tell. And these Sunday evenings together have become the highlight of my week." Dawson crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. "Zara, may I court you properly? I know we work together and that complicates things, but I want to do this right. I want to take you on proper outings, bring you flowers, show the whole town that I am pursuing you with honorable intentions." "Yes," Zara said, smiling up at him. "Yes, I would like that very much." He lifted one of her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply romantic. "Then, with your permission, I would like to start now by telling you that you look beautiful today, that your eyes remind me of the oak leaves in autumn, all gold and green and brown mixed together. And I would like to kiss you, if you will allow it." "I will allow it," Zara whispered, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then with growing passion as she responded to him. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, sweet and exciting and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Zara laughed softly. "The stew is going to burn if we do not pay attention." "Then let it burn," Dawson said, but he was smiling as he said it, and he did go check on the pot, stirring it carefully and adjusting the heat. "Actually, it is perfect. Shall we call the men in?" The Sunday supper that followed was joyous, the food delicious and the company warm. If the men noticed that their boss and their foreman kept exchanging glances and smiling at each other, they were kind enough not to comment on it. After the meal, Dawson helped with the dishes as usual, but this time when they were finished, he pulled Zara into his arms and kissed her again, longer and deeper than before. "I should go," he said reluctantly when they finally broke apart. "But I will see you in the morning, and every morning after that if I have my way." "You will," Zara promised, and she meant it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and courtship. Dawson proved to be as attentive a suitor as he was a foreman, finding small ways to show his affection even in the midst of busy days. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range, helped her with the bookkeeping in the evenings so they could spend more time together, taught her more cooking techniques so that her weekday meals began to improve, though her biscuits remained stubbornly terrible. On Sundays, they cooked together, creating meals that brought the ranch hands together and made the place feel like home. Zara found herself looking forward to those mornings in the kitchen with Dawson, the easy intimacy of working side by side, the way he would occasionally drop a kiss on her temple or squeeze her hand as they passed each other. They took rides together when they could, exploring the boundaries of the ranch and talking about their dreams for its future. Dawson had ideas for improvements, ways to increase their productivity and profitability, and he listened seriously when Zara shared her own plans. They were building something together, not just a relationship but a vision for what the Kincaid Ranch could become. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Dawson turned to her with a serious expression. "Zara, I know we have not been courting long, but I am 30 years old and I know my own heart. I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Zara felt tears spring to her eyes, happy tears this time. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Dawson pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small garnet that caught the light of the setting sun. "This was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She left it to me before she died, told me to give it to a woman who was strong enough to stand beside me rather than behind me. I think she would have liked you." "I wish I could have met her," Zara said, admiring the ring on her hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "She would have loved your Sunday stews," Dawson said, grinning. "And she would have been baffled by your biscuits. She used to say that any woman could learn to cook if she put her mind to it, but I think even she would have met her match trying to teach you biscuits." Zara laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "I am going to learn eventually, you just wait." "I will wait," Dawson said, pulling her close. "I will wait as long as it takes for biscuits and for everything else. I am not going anywhere." They decided to marry in October, after the fall roundup was complete and they had taken their cattle to market. It gave them time to prepare, to send word to Dawson's family back east, and to make arrangements for a wedding that would be simple but meaningful. As summer gave way to fall, Zara found herself happier than she had been since before her father's death. The ranch was thriving under her and Dawson's joint management. The cattle were healthy and fat from good grazing, and the men were content with their work and their living conditions. The Sunday stews had become a tradition that everyone looked forward to, a time when they came together not just as employer and employees, but as something closer to family. One Sunday morning, about a month before the wedding, Dawson suggested they make something different, a recipe his mother used to make that involved chicken and dumplings and herbs from the garden. They worked together in the kitchen, their movements synchronized after so many weeks of cooking side by side, and Zara found herself thinking about what their life would be like after they were married, when this would be their kitchen rather than just hers, when they would wake up together every morning and fall asleep together every night. "What are you thinking about?" Dawson asked, catching her staring off into space with a smile on her face. "The future," Zara admitted. "Our future. I was thinking about how lucky I am to have found you, to be able to share my life with someone who understands me and supports me, and makes me laugh even when I am frustrated with my terrible biscuits." "The biscuits are getting better," Dawson said diplomatically. "They are not," Zara said, laughing, "but I appreciate you saying so." He crossed to where she stood and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Zara, I want you to know that I do not care if you never learn to make a decent biscuit. You could feed me nothing but burned bread and raw potatoes, and I would still consider myself the luckiest man alive to wake up beside you every morning." "That is sweet," Zara said, leaning back into his embrace. "But I think the ranch hands might have something to say about it if I started serving raw potatoes." "Fair point," Dawson conceded. "Then let me rephrase. I love you for who you are, not for your cooking skills or lack thereof. I love your strength and your determination, and the way you care about the people who depend on you. I love the way your mind works, always thinking ahead and planning and solving problems. I love the way you sit a horse, and the way you negotiate a business deal, and the way you look at me like I hung the moon even though we both know you could run this ranch just fine without me." "I could not," Zara said softly, turning in his arms to face him. "I could not run this ranch without you, and more importantly, I would not want to. You have made my life better in every way, Dawson Tucker, and I cannot wait to be your wife." He kissed her then, a kiss full of love and promise and the certain knowledge that they had found in each other something precious and rare. When they finally pulled apart, the chicken was done and the dumplings were perfect, and the kitchen smelled like home. The Sunday dinner that followed was one of the best they had ever made, the chicken tender and flavorful, the dumplings light and fluffy. After the men had eaten their fill and headed back to the bunkhouse, Dawson told them to take the rest of the day off while he and Zara cleaned up. But instead of doing dishes, Dawson took Zara's hand and led her out to the porch, where the October afternoon was golden and mild. "I was thinking," he said as they settled into the porch swing together, "that after we are married, maybe we could make some changes to the house. Add on a bedroom or two, thinking ahead to when we might have children. Fix up the kitchen a bit, make it more modern." "Children," Zara repeated, the word filling her with a mixture of excitement and fear. Do you want children? If we are blessed with them, yes, Dawson said. But only when you are ready. I know you have a lot on your plate with the ranch, and I do not want to pressure you into anything you are not prepared for. I want children, Zara said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. I want to fill this house with laughter and noise and chaos. I want to teach them to ride and to work the ranch, and I want you to teach them your stories and your wisdom. I want to build something that will last beyond us. Then that is what we will do, Dawson said, squeezing her hand. Together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding preparations in between the urgent work of the fall roundup. They rode out every day to gather the cattle, separating out the ones they would take to market from the ones they would keep for breeding stock. It was hard, dusty work that left them exhausted every evening, but it was also satisfying to see the fruits of their labor, to count the healthy calves that had been born that spring, and to know that the ranch was thriving. On the day before the wedding, Dawson's family arrived from Illinois, his parents and two younger sisters who were delighted to finally meet the woman who had captured their brother's heart. His mother was a warm, practical woman who reminded Zara somewhat of Rosa, and his father was a quiet man who observed more than he spoke, but who had a kind smile. That evening, Zara made her Sunday stew for the extended gathering, feeding not just the ranch hands but Dawson's family as well. She was nervous about cooking for his mother, who had a reputation as an excellent cook, but the older woman ate heartily and complimented the meal sincerely. Dawson wrote to us about your Sunday stews, his mother said as they cleaned up together after dinner. He said they reminded him of home, and now I understand why. You have a gift for this kind of cooking, the kind that feeds the soul as well as the body. Thank you, Zara said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. That means more than you know. I am not much of a cook otherwise. My biscuits are terrible, and most of my weekday meals are barely edible. Dawson's mother laughed. My dear, do you know what Dawson's father ate when we first married? Charcoal. I burned everything I touched for the first 6 months. But he ate it without complaint and told me he loved me anyway, and eventually I learned. The important thing is not that you cook perfectly, it is that you put love into what you make. And this stew, well, it is clear that love went into every bite. The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon, naturally, in the front yard of the ranch house under a brilliant blue October sky. The preacher from town came out to perform the ceremony, and all the ranch hands served as witnesses along with Dawson's family. Zara wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her by one of the women in town, and Dawson wore his best suit, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. As they spoke their vows, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, Zara felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she was meant to be, standing beside this man, building a life and a home on the land her father had loved. After the ceremony, they served a wedding feast that Zara and Dawson had prepared together over the past few days. There was the famous beef stew, of course, but also roasted chickens and fresh bread and vegetables from the garden, pies made with apples from the orchard and cream from their dairy cow. It was a meal worthy of celebration, and everyone ate and drank and danced to fiddle music played by one of the ranch hands who had hidden talents. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Dawson pulled Zara away from the crowd and into the house, leading her up the stairs to the bedroom that was now theirs together rather than just hers alone. "Mrs. Tucker," he said, testing out her new name, "how does it feel?" "Perfect," Zara said, reaching up to loosen his tie. "Everything feels perfect." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a coming together that felt both exciting and natural, as if they had been meant for each other all along. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Dawson stroked her hair and spoke softly. "I want you to know that I meant every word I said today. I will love you until my last breath, Zara. You have given me everything I ever wanted, a home and a purpose and someone to share it all with." "You have given me the same," Zara whispered. "I thought I had lost everything when my father died, but then you showed me that I was building something new, something different but just as valuable. You showed me that I did not have to do everything alone." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Zara woke the next morning to find Dawson still beside her, she smiled with pure joy. This was her life now, and it was better than anything she could have imagined. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. They took their cattle to market in Kansas City and got good prices, enough to pay off the ranch's debts and make the improvements they had discussed. They added 2 bedrooms to the house, thinking ahead to the family they hoped to have, and they modernized the kitchen with a new stove that Zara hoped might help her finally master biscuits, though it did not. Dawson's family went back to Illinois after staying for 2 weeks, but they promised to return for a visit the following summer. His mother left Zara with a notebook full of recipes and cooking tips, which Zara treasured even though she knew she would probably never use most of them. Winter came early that year, bringing snow in November that blanketed the ranch in white. They spent long evenings by the fire, Dawson teaching Zara to knit while she taught him the finer points of bookkeeping. They made love often and talked even more often, learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. In February, Zara realized she had missed her monthly courses and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. She waited another week to be sure before telling Dawson, and when she finally did, he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby." "Assuming everything goes well," Zara cautioned, not wanting to jinx it by being too confident. "Everything will go well," Dawson said firmly. "You are strong and healthy, and we will take good care of you, both of you." He was true to his word, taking over more of the physically demanding ranch work so that Zara could rest, insisting she eat properly and take afternoon naps, even though she protested that she felt fine. As her belly began to swell with their child, he would rest his hand there in the evenings, marveling at the life growing inside her. The baby was born in October, almost exactly a year after their wedding, during the week of the fall roundup. It was a difficult labor that lasted through the night and into the next day, and there were moments when Zara was afraid, when she thought of her mother who had died bringing her into the world and wondered if she would suffer the same fate. But Dawson stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow and telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. And when the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, it was Dawson who placed their son in her arms. "A boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have a son, Zara." They named him Marcus after her father, and he had Zara's brown hair and Dawson's blue-gray eyes. He was a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention and gave love freely, and Zara fell in love with him the moment she held him. The ranch hands came by to see the baby, each of them offering awkward congratulations and small gifts they had made or bought. Charlie, now 20 in one of their most reliable hands, brought a wooden rattle he had carved himself. The cook they had finally hired after Zara's pregnancy made her too tired to manage all the kitchen work brought a basket of supplies and offered to help with whatever was needed. But it was the Sunday after Marcus was born, when Zara was finally strong enough to be up and about, that she felt like life was returning to normal. She insisted on cooking the Sunday stew, though Dawson protested that she should rest. "I have been resting for a week," Zara argued. "I need to do something normal, something that makes me feel like myself. Besides, everyone is coming to meet Marcus properly, and I want to feed them well." So they cooked together as they always did, with Marcus sleeping in a cradle nearby where they could watch him. The stew was perfect, as it always was, and when the men gathered to eat, they toasted the new baby and his parents and the future of the Kincaid ranch, which now had a new generation to inherit it. After everyone had left and the kitchen was clean, Dawson pulled Zara into his arms carefully, mindful of her still healing body. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" Zara asked. "For this life. For our son. For these Sunday stews that brought us together in the first place. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For being brave and strong and stubborn and everything I never knew I needed." "You know my biscuits are still terrible," Zara pointed out, making him laugh. "I do know that," he agreed. "But your stew saved Sundays, and Sunday stew saved me. It brought me to your kitchen, gave us time together, helped me fall in love with you. And now look at us. We have everything." "Not everything," Zara said, smiling up at him. "We still need to finish the fall roundup, repair the fence on the north pasture, get the supplies ordered before winter, break in those new horses we bought." "All right," Dawson conceded, laughing. "We have everything that matters. The rest is just work, and work we can handle together." They stood in their kitchen, holding each other as their son slept nearby, and Zara thought back to that first Sunday when she had decided to make Rosa's stew, never imagining where it would lead. She had been so alone then, so uncertain of her ability to run the ranch and take care of the men who depended on her. And now here she was, surrounded by love and purpose and hope for the future. The years that followed were good ones. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose after Rosa and another boy they called James, and the ranch prospered under their joint management. Dawson proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving and firm when necessary, teaching their children everything he knew about ranching and horses and how to be good people. Zara never did learn to make decent biscuits, despite years of trying and despite Dawson's patient instruction. It became something of a family joke, how she could make a stew that would bring tears to your eyes, it was so good, but could not manage a simple biscuit to save her life. The children grew up eating their father's biscuits during the week and their mother's stew on Sundays, and they never questioned that this was how things were supposed to be. Marcus grew into a strong, capable boy who loved working with the cattle and had his mother's head for numbers. Rose was quieter, more contemplative, but she had a way with horses that was almost magical. James was the youngest and the wildest, always getting into scrapes and adventures, but always learning from them too. On Sundays, they all gathered around the table, not just the family but the ranch hands too, some of whom had been there since the beginning and others who were new. The tradition of Sunday stew continued, becoming legendary in the area. People talked about the Kincaid Tucker Ranch as a good place to work, where the owners treated their hands fairly and fed them well, where Sunday dinner was something special. When Zara was 35 years old, she stood in her kitchen one Sunday morning making the stew as she had done hundreds of times before. But this time, she paused to really look around her. The kitchen had been expanded and modernized over the years, with a new stove and better storage and big windows that let in lots of light. But the old pot she used for the stew was the same one Rosa had used, seasoned with decades of use and love. Dawson came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, just as he had done countless times before. But this time she turned in his arms and really looked at him, seeing the gray that was starting to appear at his temples, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the scars on his hands from ranch work. He was 45 now, solidly middle-aged but still handsome to her, still the man who had won her heart with patience and kindness. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, the same question he had asked her so many times over the years. "How lucky I am," Zara said simply. "How one decision to make a pot of stew changed my entire life." "It was a good stew," Dawson agreed solemnly, then smiled. "And it led to a second pot of stew, and somewhere in there I realized I could not live without you. So I guess you could say your stew saved me, and I married you after the second pot." "That is a terrible way to phrase it," Zara said, laughing. "It makes it sound like you married me for my cooking." "I did marry you for your cooking," Dawson said. "At least partly. Your stew showed me you were willing to work hard at something, to honor tradition, to take care of people. It showed me your heart, Zara. And once I saw your heart, I knew I was lost." She kissed him then, not caring that their children might walk in at any moment, not caring that the stew needed tending, caring only about this moment with this man who had changed her life in ways she never could have predicted. That afternoon they served the stew as always, surrounded by family and friends and the people who made their ranch run. Marcus, now 13, helped serve the food, taking his responsibilities seriously. Rose, 11, made sure everyone had what they needed, her quiet attentiveness ensuring no one was overlooked. James, just 8, entertained everyone with stories of the new calf he had helped deliver that week. As Zara looked around the table at all these faces she loved, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about her father, who had taught her to be strong and independent. She thought about Rosa, whose recipe had started all of this. She thought about her mother, who she had never known but who had given her life. And she thought about Dawson, who had shown her that strength did not mean doing everything alone, that asking for help was not weakness, that love could transform even the most ordinary moments into something extraordinary. After the meal, as everyone scattered to their afternoon activities, Dawson pulled her aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "What is the occasion?" Zara asked, puzzled. "No occasion," Dawson said. "Just that I was in town last week, and I saw this and thought of you." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find a beautiful wooden spoon, carved from dark wood and polished to a shine. The handle was decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves and flowers, and her initials were carved into the end. "It is beautiful," Zara breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I had it made special," Dawson said. "I figured after all these years of making Sunday stew, you deserved a proper spoon. One that is just yours, that you can pass down to Rose or to Marcus's wife someday, along with the recipe and the tradition." Zara felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I love it. I love you." "I love you too," Dawson said, pulling her close. "And I love our life together, every messy, chaotic, beautiful moment of it." They stood together in the afternoon sunshine, holding each other as they had done so many times before, as they would do many times again. Around them, their children played and their ranch thrived and their future stretched out full of possibility. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Zara and Dawson sat on the porch swing as they often did, watching the stars come out over the prairie. She rested her head on his shoulder and he held her hand, and they talked about everything and nothing, the easy conversation of people who know each other deeply and love each other completely. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked suddenly. "Marrying your boss, taking on a ready-made ranch and all the responsibilities that came with it. Never, Dawson said firmly. Not for one single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zara. This ranch, our children, this life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. I was a drifter before I came here, moving from place to place without roots or purpose. Your father gave me a chance and you gave me a home. How could I ever regret that? I could not have done any of this without you, Zara said. When my father died, I was so lost. I thought I could do it all myself, that asking for help meant I was weak. But you showed me that partnership makes us stronger, that we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could apart. We make a good team, Dawson agreed. The best team I know. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Dawson spoke again. You know what I think about sometimes? That first Sunday when you made the stew. I could smell it cooking all day, and by the time you called us in I was half-starved and entirely curious. And then I tasted it and I thought, this woman has hidden depths. She can run a ranch and negotiate with cattle buyers and sit a horse better than most men, and she can also make a stew that tastes like home. I think that was the moment I started falling for you. It took you until the second pot to propose, though, Zara teased. Well, I had to be sure, Dawson said, grinning. What if the first pot was a fluke? But then you made it again the next week, and it was just as good, and I realized you were consistent, that you would show up week after week and put in the effort to make something special for all of us. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. So you married me because I am consistent, Zara said dryly. I married you because you are consistent and brave and smart and beautiful and terrible at making biscuits, Dawson corrected. The whole package. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet yard. Inside the house, their children slept safely in their beds. In the barn, the horses and cattle rested. Across the property, the ranch hands were settling in for the night in the bunkhouse. Everything was as it should be, peaceful and secure. As the years continued to pass, the Sunday stew tradition never wavered. When Marcus grew up and brought home a wife, Zara taught the young woman the recipe, passing along Rose's old cookbook and her own accumulated wisdom. When Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, she insisted on having the stew served at her wedding reception. When James headed off to study agriculture at the new land-grant college in Oklahoma, he wrote home asking for the recipe so he could make it in his dormitory kitchen. Dawson and Zara grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their hands becoming gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminishing. They still cooked together every Sunday when they were able, still sat on the porch swing in the evenings, still found joy in the simple pleasure of each other's company. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a big celebration. Zara made her famous stew, though she needed more help than she used to, and Dawson made biscuits because his wife still burned on the bottom and remained raw in the middle even after 3 decades of trying. After the meal, Marcus stood up to make a toast. He was 43 now, running the ranch alongside his father while Zara handled the business side of things from the comfort of her office. He had his mother's business sense and his father's way with cattle, and the ranch had continued to prosper under his management. I want to thank my parents, Marcus said, raising his glass. Not just for this ranch, which they built into something we can all be proud of, but for the example they set. They showed us that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. They showed us that hard work and dedication pay off. They showed us that family, whether blood relation or chosen, is what matters most. And they showed us that a good stew on Sunday can change your whole life. Everyone laughed and raised their glasses, drinking to Dawson and Zara, who sat at the head of the table holding hands as they had done at every Sunday dinner for the past 30 years. Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had departed, Dawson and Zara found themselves alone in the kitchen once more, washing dishes together as they had done countless times. 30 years, Zara said, shaking her head in wonder. Where did the time go? Into this, Dawson said, gesturing around them. Into our children and our ranch and our life together. Every moment well spent, even the moments when you had to eat my terrible biscuits, Zara asked, smiling. Especially those moments, Dawson said seriously. Because they reminded me that nobody is perfect, that we all have our strengths and weaknesses. You can run a ranch and raise children and make the best stew in the territory, but you cannot make a biscuit to save your life. And that is fine, because I can make the biscuits and you can make the stew, and together we have everything we need. We do, Zara agreed softly. We really do. They finished the dishes and walked through their house, turning down lamps and checking that everything was secure for the night. In the morning, they would wake and begin another week, another cycle of work and life and love. But for now, they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Dawson's hand warm and solid in Zara's, and prepared for sleep. As she drifted off, Zara thought about that first Sunday when she had decided to make stew instead of giving up on cooking altogether. She thought about how Dawson had complimented the meal, how he had helped with the dishes, how he had come back week after week until helping in the kitchen had become courting and courting had become marriage, and marriage had become this rich, full life they shared. Her biscuits had been terrible. It was true. They still were terrible after all these years of trying. But her stew had saved Sundays, had created a tradition that brought people together and made a house feel like home. And the cowboy had married her after the second pot, had chosen her not despite her flaws but because of the whole package, imperfections included. It was a good life, Zara thought as sleep claimed her. A very good life indeed. The next morning, Zara woke before dawn as she always did, her body trained by decades of ranch work to rise early. Dawson still slept beside her, snoring softly, and she took a moment to watch him in the dim light. Even after 30 years, she still felt that flutter in her chest when she looked at him, still felt grateful beyond measure that he had come into her life when she needed him most. She rose quietly and made her way downstairs, starting the coffee and beginning preparations for breakfast. The biscuits she attempted were, as always, disastrous, emerging from the oven burned and raw simultaneously. But when Dawson came down and tasted one, he smiled at her over his coffee cup and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Tucker. Ready for another week with you," Zara said. "Always." And so life continued on the Kincaid Tucker Ranch, with its traditions and its love and its terrible biscuits and wonderful stews. The children grew and had children of their own, and the ranch expanded and evolved with each generation. But every Sunday, without fail, the family gathered for stew, carrying on the tradition that had started decades ago when a grieving young woman decided to honor her cook's memory by attempting her famous recipe. Years later, when Dawson and Zara were both well into their 70s, they sat together on their porch one final Sunday evening after making the stew one last time with their children's help. They held hands and watched the sun set over the prairie they had worked for so many years. No regrets. Dawson asked, his voice thin with age but still warm with love. "Not a single one," Zara replied. "You. Only that I did not marry you after the first pot of stew instead of waiting for the second," Dawson said, making her laugh. "I could have had an extra week of happiness." "We have had plenty of happiness," Zara said, squeezing his hand. "More than most people ever find. We have been truly blessed." "We have," Dawson agreed. And it all started with your terrible biscuits and wonderful stew. They sat together as the stars came out, talking softly about their life and their memories, grateful for every moment they had shared. When they finally rose to go inside, they moved slowly, their bodies aged and tired, but their hearts still full of love for each other, and for the life they had built together on this Oklahoma ranch under the wide western sky. The tradition of Sunday stew continued long after Dawson and Zara were gone, carried on by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The old pot Rosa had used was eventually retired to a place of honor on the mantel, replaced by newer vessels but never forgotten. And every time the family gathered for Sunday dinner, someone would invariably tell the story of how their grandmother's terrible biscuits but wonderful stew had brought their grandparents together, how the cowboy had married her after the second pot, how love and perseverance and one good recipe had built a legacy that lasted for generations. It was a love story that started in a kitchen, grew around a table, and flourished across decades of shared mornings and quiet evenings, hard work and gentle affection. It was a story of two people who found each other when they needed it most and chose each other every day thereafter. And at its heart was a simple truth, that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories grow from the most ordinary moments, like a cowboy tasting a widow's stew and recognizing home.